everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello, my name is Kat. I do makeup videos, challenges, whatever, and then on occasion fitness videos. And so if you landed on this particular video, congratulations, you've stumbled on a fitness conversation. Just a real quick disclaimer for anybody that is actually new. I am not a doctor, physician, nutritionist, dietitian, any of that kind of stuff. I do have a master's degree in sports and health sciences, and I've been a personal trainer for the last roughly 10 years-ish. Yeah, any of the stuff that we talk about on here, it's primarily just my opinion, the things that I've discovered over the years, done research on for my degree, all of that kind of stuff. So it's just thoughts and opinions. We have discussions here. So for today's video, I thought I would have us talk about, in particular, the last 6 months and the effect that that has had on how different types of sports conduct themselves these days. I'm only going to discuss a couple because otherwise we would just be here forever. So I'm primarily going to be looking at the deadlift world record that Hafthor Bjornsson set back in April, May timeframe, whenever that roughly that was. I'm also going to look at the CrossFit Games and what the setup is going to be for this year for that, and then also the US Open for tennis. So I'm primarily sticking to mostly individual sports, just because I think that that dynamic is super interesting, how that's being put together. I think for team sports, that's a whole other animal. And so, yeah, we're just gonna get into a discussion on that. I'm gonna toss out my thoughts and considerations on there, and I would love it if you guys have any thoughts or opinions on it. If you want to toss it in the comments down below, we can really get a good debate going. I would love that. I'm just gonna do my makeup in the background, as I do. We're just gonna get started, and for anyone that is curious, for my eyes today, I'm gonna be using the Tati Textured Neutrals palette, because I've been doing a lot of color lately, and I feel like I've forgotten how to do neutral looks. So we're gonna give that a go. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was with the deadlift that Hafthor Bjornsson did. So essentially he did a 500 kilogram deadlift, which was setting a new world record. And he did this a few months ago. Sorry to interject real quick, but Hafthor set a 501 kilogram deadlift record, not a 500 kilogram. The 500 kilogram was actually set by Eddie Hall during an actual competition, which is part of what is driving the whole debate on whether Hafthor's deadlift counted or not. And it was very highly debated within the strongman community and just in general, because the question became, since it was not during a competition, it was just in the comfort of his own gym that he has in Iceland, and he had his entire hype team around, and so the mental circumstances and the environment in which he was doing this deadlift was very different than what you would see during a competition, because during a competition obviously you have the crowd and you have the pressure from where the other athletes are at in the competition, how much weight they're pulling. Those are all things that are going to affect your performance. And so a lot of people were contesting that it was actually a world record, because since he was not competing against anybody per se, it was just him against the world record and nothing else, a lot of people didn't really feel like he set a world record. But then you have the other people on the other side that are saying essentially at the end of the day he pulled the weight, so regardless of the environment in which he was in, he still lifted the weight to set a world record. So I thought that was kind of an interesting argument on both sides, because I definitely can see both sides, and as a competitive athlete I know how much of an impact the competitive environment within an actual physical competition, how much that can play a role in your performance versus if you're just in the comfort of your own gym. Because when I'm in training in the gym, I hit personal records on a decent basis, and it's primarily because I'm able to set the environment myself. I'm able to listen to the type of music that I want to be listening to. I'm able to just zone in on my lift and kind of block everything else out. A lot of times I'm alone in that portion of the gym, so I don't have to worry about other people watching and seeing my performance, which removes any of that potential for performance anxiety. And so there's just, it makes it a lot easier and less stressful to try and hit a lift if you're able to put the environment together with the way that you want. You also don't have to have a particular time frame in which you have to accomplish the lift. During competitive weightlifting, when you go up to lift, you have a certain amount of time in which you have to perform the lift when you're on the platform, and if you don't accomplish it within that time frame, like as far as getting the bar off the ground, then the lift doesn't count. And so not having a time frame means you can mentally set yourself much more effectively. You don't have to rush. And so it's a completely different environment. From my perspective within competing, I think, yes, he did pull the weight, but I also have to wonder if other strongmen like Eddie Hall would be able to pull the weight, or Brian Shaw, or anybody else. Would they be able to pull the weight in their own training settings and just not have eyes on while they're doing it? Especially in Eddie Hall's particular case, I think, yeah, he definitely would have been able to. And so if that was what he was specifically training for, because Hafthor was focused solely on the deadlift, since that was all that he was working towards, you know, that the training is very different than if you're attempting to get ready for an entire strongman competition where you have multiple events that are very different from each other that you're having to worry about. I think that's something where it's a tricky thing, because no matter what, he did lift the weight, and nobody else filmed themselves lifting the weight. And so there is that aspect of it that we don't want to take away from that. You know, he lifted the weight. It counts from that perspective, but I feel like at the end of the day, there would be an asterisk next to it because he did it outside of a competition. So that's my thoughts on that particular event. I think that, especially given where we are at these days because of the effects of the last few months on athletics, the question now becomes, are we going to go back to a normal type status with athletics? In which case, then absolutely, I think that is something that would have an asterisk next to it. However, if things continue the way that they have been, then there becomes the question of, is that the new norm? In which case, maybe there shouldn't be an asterisk next to it, because that's just the new style of competition, because we can't have big group competitions anymore because of the need for social distancing. But I think, I mean, we're starting to see already where there are some smaller weightlifting competitions going on. You know, Maddie Rogers just did a weightlifting competition, I think just like a week or two ago. They were able to maintain social distancing while she was doing the lifts, and everything worked out fine, and that was definitely within competition. And so I think at this point, given how things are progressing and the fact that I think we will be going back to some form of normalcy, I don't think that the lift should really count. That's just my thought. But again, it is a very interesting debate to be having, because I don't know, will things truly go back to normal? In which case, you know, as I said, then I don't think it should count. But if they don't go back to normal, it should count as the new norm. Moving on. I think I've kind of gotten into that particular one enough. I would love to know your guys' thoughts on that, whether you think the lift counted or not, because it's a super interesting thing to consider. Along a similar vein is with the US Open for tennis this year. They are having it. However, a lot of the top athletes, because in tennis there are definitely, the majority of the top athletes are not American. You do have obviously a few, because like Serena Williams is just dominant in the sport on the female side, which props to her, because she's literally goals for me. Her physical capabilities are just amazeballs. And so from an athletic standpoint, I fucking love her. I mean, she's older than I am, and she is just fantastic. Like, her athleticism, I literally, like, peak athleticism to me. Like, I want her upper body. Like, I want those. My shoulders and traps are just mini compared to her. And so love her. You know, I think that the way that they have the potential set up for the US Open for this year is interesting, because there are a lot of athletes that potentially might not be able to make it because they're coming from overseas and travel restrictions with everything might prevent them from showing up. And it's interesting because I don't think that that's going to be the case for forever. I think at some point the borders will open back up a bit more and travel will become a bit more normal, but for right now, in time for the US Open, I don't think it's going to happen. It would be interesting to see with that, because obviously all of the competitors within the United States would be able to make it. How many athletes are outside of the United States? And so it becomes the question of, if you have a lot of top players that are going to be missing because they can't make it due to the travel restrictions, is this also something where we would really count it? And it's also a question of prize money. Like, if you have a certain percentage of the top players are not able to make it, to me that reduces the quality and viewership that you would receive for that particular competition, which means the prize money should be reduced. So in tennis, you have different level tournaments that earn you different amounts. And so within the pro circuit, you have your smaller competitions that are more of like your local circuit, where it's like 10 to 20,000 prize money range, and then it increases to like 50 and 100,000, and then obviously the Grand Slams, which the US Open is a Grand Slam, that's your top tier, where it's like in the millions that you could potentially win. And so I think that if you are unable to have a large percentage of the top athletes show up, I don't think that the prize money should be the same as it would be at a normal Grand Slam. And also, again, from that mental aspect, if you're going into a competition and you know that there are not going to be as many top tier players, that's going to reduce the amount of stress that an athlete... Ooh, I need to grab primer real quick. Stand by, I'll be right back. I had it right in front of my face. Okay, that's going to reduce the amount of stress that you're going to have. You know, if you know that the top player from another country isn't there, then you don't have to worry. Also, if the level of competition is not as high, you're not having to exert as much energy. So with tennis competitions, if you're unfamiliar, they have, you know, like the round of 32, then the round of 16, quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals. And so over the course of 2 weeks, you are playing many matches if you make it to the finals. If the level of competition is not as high, and it's easier for you to beat them because they are lower level players, that's going to cause less physical exertion, so you're going to be less tired at the end of that 2 weeks, versus if you're playing against other top tier players earlier in the competition, depending on the seeding. And so I don't know how I would feel about that as far as like counting it the same way that I would count any other Grand Slam, where you have all of the top players that are there. Now, sometimes though, you'll have like athletes that will get injured, and so you won't necessarily have all of the top players at a Grand Slam. And so there is that potential argument that, you know, who's to say, like, if they get injured or sick or whatever, you know, that wouldn't be a normal thing that would happen anyway. But I feel like, in my opinion, I would definitely say at the end of the day, you are still playing tennis and you're still having the 2 weeks that you would need to be playing. So you're still actively participating, you know, and so I think it should definitely still count as a tournament. I just think that it should be something where they reduce the tier of the competition to where it's not considered a Grand Slam standard for this particular year, just because you're not having all of the top players. That is definitely something where I am super interested to know what your guys' thoughts are. That was something where, you know, from a press release, so Serena Williams definitely already said that she's committed, she's going. So from her perspective, you know, she's probably looking at it like, I am there, I am competing, so it should count. And so, but there is also kind of like that additional, a little bit of drama aspect to it of that, you know, if you are a tennis player where you have won every single Grand Slam, like the Australian Open, the French Open, Wimbledon, like if you've won all of those and you're just missing the US Open as like your final one to say that you've won all of them, and now you luck out that this year, because of everything, not all the top players are able to go, like you could potentially check that off your list, you know, and say, hey, I won all the Grand Slams. But did you? Did you really? So I think from like a competitive aspect, like I feel like that one's a super tough question because you are in a competitive setting. It's not like with Hafthor with the deadlift where you're not in a competitive setting at all. You're in the comfort of your own gym. You know, it's not like these tennis players are in the comfort of their own tennis courts where they train at. You know, they are in fact competing in a tennis tournament. It's a really interesting question because I'm kind of like, I mean, you are competing. I feel like the compromise needs to be that it is just reduced. I wouldn't consider it a Grand Slam if a decent amount of the competition is missing. That's my 2 cents, but obviously I am not a professional tennis player. These are just my own thoughts and opinions as a competitive athlete on whether I would consider that real or not. And like, I know that from my own perspective, if I was at a competition and the top opponents that I would be used to competing against were not able to be present, I wouldn't want to count it. Like, if I won that one, I would not feel like I truly won it. I've had racquetball competitions that I've gone to where the other top female competitors sometimes weren't able to make it because I competed in college. And so if you had like a particular tournament that was set up and someone wasn't able to come because they had like a class or a test or something that was conflicting with it, I didn't want to count it if I won it. I mean, I would still, it was a win, but like internally I would just kind of be like, it was winning a tournament, but I wasn't the best because I didn't get to compete against the other best players out there. And so internally, I never enjoyed those competitions as much if the other top tier athletes weren't able to be there. I would love to know what your guys' thoughts are on the tennis one because I think that that's definitely a very interesting question of validity on there and whether or not the tournament should be considered a Grand Slam. You know, I think no matter what, it does count as a competition. You are competing in a setting outside of your normal training and you are going up against other competitors. And so I definitely think as competition goes, it should count. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is going to be the CrossFit Games for this year, which are indeed happening. Another YouTuber that I think if you're wanting a lot more in-depth explanation of how the CrossFit Games are going to be working for this year, you should go and check out Craig Ritchie, his YouTube channel, Team Ritchie. I'll link it down below. He's been doing a really great job of like keeping us informed on like how this is going to go this year. And so if you're wanting like super duper in-depth, I would go check him out. But this is just from my own personal perspective on the most recent stuff that I have seen for how it's going to be going down. So normally, and the CrossFit Games has been like, the road to the games has changed drastically in the last couple of years anyway, and so there is not really a normal, I guess, for right now. Quasi-normally, in the last like year or two. Essentially, the road to the games was set up to where you would have sanctional competitions, which are kind of similar to like how you have the pro circuit in tennis leading up to the Grand Slams. And so if you go to any of these sanctional competitions, and the primary difference between a sanctional and just a regular CrossFit competition is that the sanctionals are essentially that they offer you, whoever the winner is, they offer you a ticket to the games, essentially. Whereas with other CrossFit, like smaller CrossFit competitions, if they aren't sanctioned, they still count like locally or whatever, or towards your general ranking if you want to have a ranking, but they don't get you a ticket to the games, per se. And so that's one of the primary differences for that. The sanctionals are one of the ways in which you can acquire a ticket to the games normally. Another way is through the CrossFit Open, which is an online competition that runs for several weeks where you are given a bunch of different workouts that you need to accomplish, and you video yourself and submit it. And once the review process is complete, then I believe it's the top 30 athletes from the Open that earn a ticket to the games. So also last year, what they did in addition to the top 30 athletes was that the national champions from each country also received an invite. And so that was kind of a neat change, was that it gave a lot more opportunity to smaller athletes that might not have qualified otherwise to still go and represent their country. So it's kind of more of like an Olympics type thing. This is pigmented. It gave like an Olympic style, like you could represent your country and like carry out your flag. And so I thought that was kind of a cool thing. And so there were a ton of athletes, and then they did like cuts throughout the week to kind of reduce the competition down. So I thought that was still really cool though, that athletes could go and represent. So for this year, essentially what they are doing is they are going to use kind of, again, a CrossFit Open style qualifier that has now already begun, I believe. And they're going to use that to determine who the top 5 male and female athletes will be that will go to California to compete in the CrossFit Games. So you're gonna have 10 athletes total. And I also think that this is one of those things where, again, travel restrictions might prevent people that perhaps did really well and won from going. But the other issue that I have with that is that historically with the CrossFit Games, or with the Open, I'm sorry, with the CrossFit Open, you have individual athletes that will do really, really well at the Open, and then when they get to an actual competition, they don't do as well. Because again, comfort of your own gym versus competing against other athletes is going to be different. And so I don't know if using just an open style is good, because you're gonna run into that where potentially someone that's in the top 5 for the Open might not do very well in, you know, a competition setting versus someone that is like historically not always the best at the Open, but just beasts it out during a competition. I think that's something to kind of think about. And then also just the top 5, I feel like, I get it that like we can't have a ton of people showing up because of the need for social distancing and everything, but like 5 athletes, like that's not a lot, you know? And I feel like this is definitely one of those ones where it needs to have an asterisk with it as well, because obviously the results of this are going to be very different than what you would get, you know, with something else. Because like if there's only 5 athletes, like that doesn't leave a lot of room for shuffling around in point statuses and everything. And so I don't know how I feel about that. I do think it is interesting, and I have heard that as far as like from a viewership perspective, it's going to be very similar to when they had the Rogue Open a couple months ago, which I thought was done really, really well, where they have all of the athletes kind of separated, and then, I mean, obviously they were separated like to the point of just being, again, at their own local facilities, but here they would all be in California, but then separate a little bit, and then they'll just have video on each individual athlete so you can kind of observe their progress. But I don't know, as far as like, you know, it's obviously not a true CrossFit Games by any means. It's something fun to observe, but I don't think that it should count, you know, as far as like in actual games, just because you're not really competing against the entire field in the same way that you would at any other year. But I am very interested to see how next year goes, because since they have a new owner of CrossFit and he's been really open to kind of the suggestions from the CrossFit community, and it seems like they're really making some interesting changes. I think that next season is going to be very, very interesting, but I think for this year it's just kind of a wash. And so I view this particular competition as more of just like something for viewership, so that people have, you know, something fun to watch, I guess, so that it's not like we're completely not having sports. But it's definitely not something where I consider it to be like real. But I would love to know what your guys' thoughts are. Do you think that it should count as an official games, or like how do you feel about it? And then also there's the question of, is it going to be only athletes that are living in the United States that are going to be able to go to compete? In which case, also, do we think that it counts? Because if you have the majority of the athletes, like let's say in the top 5, that you have someone like BKG, so Björgvin Karl Gudmundsson is an Icelandic athlete, and if he can't make it, do you still think that it should count? You know, same on the female side. You know, I know that Pia moved to the US, and so she's obviously there, you know, but what about the athletes that wouldn't necessarily be able to make it? Like, is Laura Horvath going to be able to make it over? I don't know. That's something where I think it'll kind of be left up to like whoever can make it. Sorry, I can never talk when I'm doing my eyes. But I would love to know what your guys' thoughts are for the CrossFit Games in particular. Do you think, you know, that it's just primarily meant to give the viewers something fun to watch, and that the athletes had just something in general to kind of occupy their time? Or do you think that it should actually like count in like the record books for, because let's be real, Matt Fraser is going to win for the guys, and so, you know, do we think that this should count towards his number that he has won, or do we think that it should just be meh, not really, you know? Still sweating a ton, but it is what it is. But yeah, that was my video for today. Just some of the things that I'm kind of thinking about with athletics and how they are evolving and changing with the times. And so I would love to know what your guys' thoughts and opinions are on everything. Are there any other sports in particular that you would maybe want for me to discuss and how they are changing? Or just anything in general, like if you guys just want to debate with me on everything, I would love that, because I would love to hear other different opinions on everything, you know, what your guys' reasons are for why you think that. But yeah, go ahead and toss a comment down below on what you're thinking. Give it a thumbs up if you liked this, and thumbs down if you didn't and you think my opinion is trash. That's cool too. I'm not opposed to it. If you are new here and you enjoy this type of content, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I would love that. I'd love to grow my community here on YouTube. And other than that, I mean, just stay safe out there, you guys, and just go have a good one.